Right, thank you very much. So we've got the final presentation of this excellent conference. We're actually moving from somewhere nice, hot, sunny and dry to somewhere cold, wet and dark, but we'll come to that later. We're going to, one of the big issues that's been talked about in Europe has been the importance of green jobs. And the European Union has a very broad definition of what a green job is. So it covers all the jobs that depend on the environment, that are created, substituted or redefined in terms of skill sets, work methods, profiles, etc. in the transition process towards the green economy. So basically they include anything that's got anything at all connected with the green economy. Partly this brings a suspicion in my own mind that they don't feel that they've got such a strong case. They want to expand their case of how important the green jobs are, so they include everything. A bit like the tourism and hospitality industry, you know, where suddenly every single job in any bar, cafe, etc. is called hotel hospitality because they wanted to make their industry appear more important. And I think there's a little bit of that in green jobs now, of where it's not just jobs connected with environmental technologies, but it's actually most construction jobs and a lot of other jobs that are only peripherally connected. Now, however, having said that, green jobs are a big potential source of employment in Europe. So the estimate is about 7.3 million jobs in the EU are currently in green sectors, particularly in areas like in energy efficiency, renewable energy, organic agriculture, waste management and recycling. But this is a very heterogeneous sector. So we're talking about green jobs. Does it make sense to talk somebody digging up organic onions and somebody who's designing the robotics for a new solar panel system? And I think that's another problem, very heterogeneous in terms of the jobs, the sectors, etc. So one of the issues we're looking at are renewable energy, which is one small section of green jobs. I think renewable is quite interesting for a number of reasons, but it covers all three of the main pillars of sustainability. There's an economic element, fundamental to energy production of any goods and products that we have. There's an environmental element, obviously reducing carbon emissions, and there's a social element. So you've got things like windmills. Where do you put these wind turbines? And often they're in a community setting. And what is the community gain, the benefit for the community of having these wind turbines located nearby? So I think it's quite an interesting sector of the green industry. Now, in the EU 27, we're looking at about 1.1 million jobs in renewable energy. And this grew by about 25% over the previous 3 years. So it's a big source of jobs, a lot of jobs, and very fast growth. And over 1/3 jobs in Germany, 174,000 in France, 100,000 in Italy, but only 31,000 in the UK. So the UK is one of the big four economies, seems to be way behind in terms of employment. In addition to producing new energy, of course, one of the best environmental and sustainable thing to do is to reduce your usage. So that's where the retrofitting insulation industry comes in, because that actually reduces the need for energy, which is much better than being able to produce more energy. So it's better to not have to produce the energy in the first place by reducing our use by more energy efficient vehicles or houses, etc. And I think that's a major source of employment growth in the future. The global market for renewable energy, so it's probably about 85% of today's market is not in Europe, it's in Asia, mainly in China. Europe and the US are also big markets, but it's particularly we need to look at the global picture. I think this reinforces what Alan said before. All the journals, the technology journals, etc., focus very much on America and Europe, but in reality, the real markets are actually somewhere else. And that's where an organization like this, which does have a better representation from across the globe, perhaps not from China, but at least from across the globe, is very important for sustainable energy and green issues. The main manufacturing, China, US, also in Europe, Germany and Denmark are very important, but they're dwarfed by China. There are very ambitious targets for renewable energy in Europe. The Europeans have got to target 100% renewable energy by 2050, which would create an extra about 6 million jobs. But realistically, I think a lot of people don't think that's going to happen. But the target for 2030, which is only 15 years from now, 4.4 million new jobs if we reach a 45% renewable energy target in 15 years. So there could be a sizable number of jobs as we move towards these targets, assuming we do actually reach them. But what about the reality? So we've had this big growth industry, lots of new jobs going to come from green energy. So what's actually happened? Well, in the last 3 years up to 2013, actually the number of green jobs fell. So you've got the rhetoric of targets, new jobs, and the reality, which is not quite the same. A lot of the reason appears to be basically solar powered. There's huge investment in solar powered energy, particularly in places like Spain. But with the crisis and the lack of investment in Spain, that's had a major impact. So the amount of jobs that were in this sector, in the renewable sector, is very, very highly geared to the state of the economy, but also to public grants to the sector and to user charges. Because, for instance, in the UK, whenever you pay your electricity bill, some of that money will go towards paying green power. Without that subsidy, there would be very little green energy generation. So there are political issues, really, that are affecting the rise and fall of these number of jobs. Now, so we've talked about European levels. Now just going down to the more Scotland. So I told you it was a bit wetter and windier than Sudan. So you've got lots of cloud there. So we have lots of hydroelectricity here. Up in the mountains there's lots of water, and we've quite a good system of collecting the water and then putting it through hydroelectricity, but only for power generation, not for usage in irrigation. We don't need any irrigation water, and we don't need it particularly for drinking water, although some of them do go into reservoirs for drinking water. But basically this is just for power. Our huge water collection is for power. It reminds me a little bit of Turkey, the issue of Turkey versus Syria for water. We've got the mountains and we do have the water. So in Scotland there were a lot of big hydroelectric schemes in the 40s and 50s and 60s, partly because of political pressure, partly they wanted to bring power to the Glen. So the Glen is a valley. And the reason you want to bring the power, though, is so you got cheap electricity. And they started putting aluminum plants up in the rural area because they've got this very cheap power. And so we can build aluminum plants, and it makes them economically viable. But in fact, the reality was, no, the power was actually very expensive still, and the aluminium plants basically closed down. Something similar is happening in New Zealand now, where you've got huge tidal and wave electricity, but the aluminium plants down in the south of the South Island are, I think, either closed or talk about closing, etc. UK also had lots of North Sea oil, but that's been going down since 2000 or so. So for the last 15 years, our North Sea oil has actually been going down. So we had a lot of green energy and green energy production. And what we actually did was we pumped a lot of oil out of the ground, and a mini Saudi Arabia, but not quite as wealthy as Saudi Arabia or quite as big. But we ended up pumping in oil. But now that we've more or less pumped out a lot of the oil, we can then move on to greener uses because there's no limited oil left. We also have a geography that suits wind power and some wave and tidal power. So we do have a geography which is very much like the last speaker. If the climate change, we have a climate that suits renewable energy, or some renewable energy, but if it did change, then would all of this policy and strategy be redundant? So the target for the Scottish Government, though, is in 5 years' time from now. They made this policy about 5 years ago. The target is for 100% of all our electricity to be from renewable sources. So that's the total energy consumption, because we'll actually produce more energy than that and export it to other parts of the UK. So energy production will actually be higher than 100%, but the renewable bit will be 100% of our consumption. So that's the target, and we possibly will get close to that. But we do have a very windy place across Scotland. Anyone who's lived there or been there, it's very, very windy all the time. Perfect for windmills, wind turbines. And this is a map here, which is the wind power. This is the European wind power. So green means very high winds. It's very high number of load hours, so it gets you a lot of wind for a lot of wind turbines. And you'll see the big thing is the North Sea here, which is very shallow. So there's a lot of offshore wind farms going to be built there. But also you can see this is quite green here. All of this is green around here. And basically no green around Istanbul, Southern Europe, very little green except on the tip of northwest Spain. And this is the big green area of Europe for wind power. However, for the sun, it's totally the opposite. This green means no sun, and we're actually green and blue. So we get very little sun, plenty of sun down in Spain, which is where most of the solar energy has been invested. Not so much in Istanbul actually, but quite a lot obviously in Istanbul and lots in southern Turkey. But you can see totally unsuitable for solar powered, really, but very suitable for wind. So what about jobs? Well, most of the jobs in renewable energy in Scotland are with wind, so wind turbines, and most of that's in the manufacturing and construction stages. And there are very few jobs during the long-run operation. When you've built the wind turbine, you've got the windmill working, there are very few jobs in long-term operation. Now, the problem for Scotland, though, is that most of the manufacturing is done abroad. They did have a manufacturing plant in Argyll, but it closed down. So now where most of the jobs are actually in Denmark or Germany. So we've got a lot of wind power in industry, but the construction of most of it is in another country. Secondly, even some of the operation is actually in another country, because some of the windmills in Scotland are monitored from Germany. So the engineer is called out, will be living in Scotland, but actually a lot of the monitoring is actually not even in Scotland. And then the other thing is some of the energy companies that own it and therefore getting the subsidy to have wind energy are actually other foreign companies, including a French company. So you actually find that relatively, the way our industry is structured, there's relatively few jobs, even though we are producing quite 100% of our energy through renewables. The number of jobs actually is quite limited. Now, there was a survey of Scotland very recently with 541 organisations. This is my co-author has provided the figures. But the estimated renewable energy is only 9,200. Most of these are in the industrial areas, not in the rural areas where most of the wind turbines are, and about 3/4 of them are male jobs. So it's actually gender is very uneven, very much in favour of male employment, this industry. And when you look at it, here are some of the main location of the industry, but it's 9,000 in total, so it's not that much. But you'll see Glasgow, which is the biggest city, is actually where most of the renewable energy. So you've got the biggest city is where renewable energy jobs are, not where there's wind turbines or not where the waves are, but actually in the cities. So this is another issue of where the jobs actually have got no relation to the actual physical location of the industry. And again, the next ones are the North East Scotland, which is Aberdeen, which is a big engineering centre, a lot to do with the oil industry, and Lothian, which is Edinburgh. So the big job centres are the big cities of Edinburgh, Glasgow, and then near Aberdeen. So again, the myth would be that you've got green windmills, lots of jobs. In fact, there are few jobs, and they're in the cities to a fairly high degree. There are some jobs in the rural areas, but, such as the Highlands, but relatively small. We also have tidal power. This is a tidal example. Again, I deliberately took this picture, use this picture because of shows you about solar gain. We can't do much on solar with this cloud, but we've got lots of heavy waves. Now, moving on then, we've talked about the number of jobs, so it's really moving on to the skills of jobs. And the majority of the organisations were saying we've got skill gaps. Now remember, in the UK, the way we talk about a skill gap is, and a skill shortage. A skill gap is within your existing workforce. Your existing workforce do not have the right skills to do everything they need to do. We call that a skill gap. A skill shortage is where we cannot hire somebody to do that job. So we've got both skill gaps, meaning the existing workforce, and skill shortages. But it seems that this industry particularly wants graduate level educated people. And the organisations appear to have strong preference for this, for people with degrees. And even stronger than most similar industries. Other engineering industries don't want so many graduates. So we're going to look here, even in administration, and there's a small number of jobs, but percentage of the respondents in the survey. So 11% of the respondents said we want graduate level administration. Non-graduate level administration is only 3.9%. Graduate level engineers, instrument and construction engineers, technical engineers, and then also management and leadership. So most of these are graduate level jobs. It's a very strong view towards graduate. So it's a green industry, but the types of jobs. So, just moving on, of course we don't just have direct jobs in renewables where building and operating these turbines, but we also have indirect jobs. So the estimated impact is for every job, it's the indirect supply chain has a gross value added, so a value added to the economy, a bit like GDP, but not quite the same, has a value added to the economy of about £66,000, so that would be about 85,000 euros per full-time equivalent job. So for every full-time equivalent job, there is quite a big value added from these jobs. And approximately 6 jobs in the supply chain are estimated to be linked to each one job in the development. So for each job you have the estimated 6. I, though in general, having calculated figures like this before in my past, I'm always a little bit wary and skeptical of, 6 jobs coming from one single job in that industry. It sounds to me quite a lot, but this would include a lot of manufacturing jobs, etc., I would suspect. So I think this might be a bit high. So they estimated that there were about 11,000 FTE jobs in Scotland. Now, the thing about, we've talked about different types of jobs and different skills, but the thing is a product life cycle. Just like any product life cycle, and you've got research and development, the new economic system, the new product, growth and acceptance of this new product, maturity, and then decline as you get alternatives. And in a way, renewable energy follows this model roughly. So at one stage, research and development into new wind turbines, etc. The planning stage, which takes a long time to plan, because you must get local community agreement, political agreement to build particularly wind turbines, wind farms we call them. Then you've got the construction phase, and the operation and maintenance phase, and decommissioning. But the thing is that each of these has very different types and numbers of jobs and multiplier effects. So they'll vary differently. And in fact, we're very much at this stage here, we've done a lot of planning, but we're still doing some planning, and we're constructing and operations. We've not got decommissioning or repowering. Repowering is where, at the end of 25 years, the wind turbine is too old. So we now, do you take it down or do you replace it? So the idea is often, oh well, you can take it down. In reality, they will be kept going for as long as they can, and then probably replaced, I would suspect. But the thing about a wind turbine, it's not just a wind turbine, it's the infrastructure going into it that's important. The electricity lines, and how do you get the power to the national grid? These are all important issues, and if the investment in that is good quality and lasts a long time, then you replace the wind turbine. If the investment in the linking technology is weak, then maybe you close down the wind turbine. So it's not just about the wind turbine that's important, or the renewable energy source, it's about all the linked infrastructure that will help determine whether or not you're going to decommission or repower. This is a town, this is where I come, this is Stirling Castle. So if anyone's seen Braveheart, this is set, well, Braveheart is set here. In fact, just around the corner here is a monument to William Wallace, etc. But the idea, these are not real ones, but there are actually ones just to the right here which are very big. This is a campaign to stop wind farms in this area. It's very politically intent. People don't want it in their backyards. They want green power, but they don't want it actually next to them. They want it in somebody else's place. Moving on very quickly because of time, is skill shortages. So there's a lack of suitable staff to hire, there's skill gaps, lack of skills among existing staff. And for installation and manufacturing especially, there's new techniques, new equipment, and the skills of existing staff are not always used effectively, which is skills utilization. When we talk about skills, we've got to think about skill gaps, skill shortages, but also how do you use the skills of the people you have? And because things are changing, you know that this person could do that job. You don't realize whether or not they can do this job. And often they have skills that are not being utilized properly. And that's a major problem in the utilization of people. Some of the skills issue which I'll just briefly mention are there's a number of development programs at EU level, but also in the Scottish Government they have an energy skills challenge fund and a low carbon skills fund trying to create the skills for these industries. However, I think what we should be doing is not just trying to create the skills for these industries, but we should be moving towards more sustainable employment in these industries. One definition of sustainable employment, actually by, in a way, the Accountant's National Audit Office, is an individual who remains in work, either in one job or moving between jobs, and work that provides opportunities for advancement and to earn more. And too much of our policy to bring people into these industries have been work first, which is where you simply try to get a person into the work and assume it'll be okay once they're in work and they can develop in the job. Well, I think we actually need a better balance about this. It does give people work experience and allows them to demonstrate their skills to employers. But in an industry like renewables, where you're talking about quite high skilled, A, the industry doesn't want that sort of person who doesn't have the right skills. And secondly, they want people who can develop and they can retrain constantly. And we need to remold our employment policies to reflect that for this industry. There's criticism of the work first, which I won't go into. But renewables need skilled people, but the entry policies into it, you're either skilled or they're not geared up to bring disadvantaged workers into this skilled industry. So what might be done? And I think very quickly, last 2 minutes, what might be done in order to bring lower skilled people into this industry so they can be developed, and these are the unemployed people and others. We need to change incentives for those who are training them to get them ready for work. And this could take greater consideration of progression after employment and the longer term career progressions of the people who are being brought into. So that you need to help the disadvantaged people, get them ready and invest in them so they can learn to learn. So it's learning to learn skills, developing the basic education as well as skills so they can then go into a job and be skilled up as things change in an industry like this, rapidly changing industry. We need to focus more on the career ladder for disadvantaged people working, including having a skill set that facilitates long-term employment, security, supports skill development and promotion, and encourages the person to manage their own skills. So it may also be based about moving from one part of this industry to another, not just stuck with one employer necessarily, but moving around. So basically we do need to prepare people much better to move into an industry like this, which is both high skill and changing skill demands. So the conclusion, trying to keep we can just give them some basic skills and they move in a high value added, high paid sector of the industry. We need to develop their skills much more before they're ready to enter into the industry. So thank you very much, and that's last week.
Excuse me, Chair. Yes. Why, it is a question, if you fill these forms,
yes.
The last session very quickly.
Please, this is the last session, so we need these forms filled quickly. And let's give him another good applause. That is not enough. For all the three good presentations. Give them very good applause, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Questions? We will have limited, but Mr. President, allow us about 4 questions. Yes. 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 Madam?
Thank you. Thank you. Just a point on the, obviously the decision of having the manufacturers of these types of power generation outside this a political one or government.
Well, an economic one, really, because...
Yeah, I think the point is on the large number of employment in the management and administration, etc. I think this is because a lot of these types, a lot of the renewable energy types of schemes, all in the UK happen as pilot schemes in a way, where they sort of implement them and look and see and monitor them and sort of devise some incentives and offer them to people and then withdraw back the incentives and change. So I think a lot of managerial, and I think, as you say, it's a shame that a lot of the efforts going into these rather than maybe training these people for some more skillful, but what could be done, and unfortunately a lot of these actually sources of energy and renewable energies, I'm not sure about them, and they don't seem to be very sustainable in the UK.
Yeah.
So,
Well, quite a lot of issues there, but just focusing on a couple. The industry is not economically sustainable without massive subsidy either from the government directly or through consumers. So, green levy, so that every time that you pay your electricity bill, you pay something towards the green element. And that's the only way it's sustainable. Whether that can be maintained, I'm not so sure. I think it probably can for the foreseeable future. But the ironic thing, really, as I said, is when you've got some of the manufacturing jobs from abroad, you've got some of the ownership and the company higher management abroad and some of the monitoring abroad, and you're saying, why are the consumers subsidizing this industry, which is not actually generating as much value added for the economy as it should do? And particularly, it's the skills I'd be worried about of all these things. That we, by importing these products or services, we're therefore not developing the skills for a really genuine, viable, sustainable industry domestically, which could then be used as a platform for export later.
Question 2? Yes? Going this way? Yes, you gentlemen.
I want to ask 2 questions. First, as far as I understood carefully, there has been a great progress in the green energy sector. Right? So I wonder if they were built by private sector or public sector, because I guess it requires a lot of money. And the second thing is these active labor market policies are quite important. Skill shortage issues. I wonder if there have been any active labor market policies implemented already. So these firms already started to make training programs, or do they cooperate with unions, for instance? If these policies are profitable for firms?
Okay, good thing. Well, the first question, mostly it's private sector. Both, you get a private landlord and then a private company will negotiate with them maybe and do the development plan, and then they will get a production and an electricity company to then actually implement the plan. So there may be different stages, different parts of the private sector at different phases. But it still is underpinned often by public investment or investment by the national grid, because in Scotland, a lot of the wind power is in the north, but the customers are in the south, and they've just almost completed a very, very large electricity connection, so link, big pylons to transfer the electricity from the north to the south, and that involved the public sector hugely. So the infrastructure is very much underwritten by public sector. because otherwise they couldn't get the electricity from production to the market. In terms of active labour market policies, I think most of those have been geared towards employees for companies, so they have some special schemes which are good and useful, but these are more geared to you have an employee and therefore you can use these schemes to train them with some entry level. But well, my argument really is that for getting particularly disadvantaged people into this industry, which is high, can be relatively high wage, good job conditions sometimes, we need to change the way we do active labour market policies to gear much more towards the career of the person. So we're getting the right type of career for the person so they can get a job that they value and is worthwhile. But also then that the company in a fast-changing world, fast-changing technology, they get somebody who can adapt to that change in the long run, and they're not having to get rid of one person and then look for another one. So I think we need to change active labour market policies to gear up people much better for this industry and for the benefit of both sides.
The third question, yes, please.
Well, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I think we made a study on renewable energy and wind energy, and our conclusions are very close to your conclusion in relation to the lack of employment, of real local employment. And in fact, we had a real pressure by the French Ministry of Ecology, which is Ministry of Energy, to tell us that there will be a lot of employment, but it's not our result. And so it's very interesting that your conclusions are concurrent. And you find that most of jobs in monitoring are not English. Well, it's quite surprising because our report is focusing on construction jobs and monitoring jobs because we find that they are the most local employment. But in those two little sectors, we didn't find a real skill gap. And there sometimes for some jobs, I don't know the name in English, sorry, but they have closed some training. Some trainings have been closed, and we find that it's a pity because we really need this kind of training. So it's a lack of training that we have. But it's not it's 5, training 5.
Training.
The high. Well,
it's try level 5. Sorry, level 5. Yeah. Sorry.
Probably. So it's not very skilled, and for monitoring, it's 2 years after 2 years for professional studies. And what do we find in monitoring? It's the main question was this question of the career, which is very important. And we wanted to work a lot on the problem of the career in monitoring because it's a very difficult job, and the time in this job is most of time 8 years, 7 years, 10 years, and then they have to change, and there's no solution for them because they can be a manager, but there's not a lot of managers in monitoring to manage the farm.
Yeah.
So it's a real question, but unfortunately the Ministry of Ecology doesn't care about those conclusions. I don't really know why, but they say, well, it's not our problem. It's a problem of the enterprise. So it's very strange. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Well, and I have a lot of more remarks, but
Okay. Thank you very much. A couple of things I would say is, I only gave an example of some monitoring is not done locally, but much monitoring is quite right. And I think there's a big gap, a difference between degree level jobs and the lower level jobs, which is a huge skill need for the lower level jobs, which is where it fits in with active labour market policy more, because a disadvantaged unemployed person is not going to go to a degree job, but they're really moving into the levels below that 2, 3, 4. And that's where we need to prepare them for, not for the degree jobs directly. I mean, it would be nice also to give some of them an opportunity for a degree job, but I was mainly focusing saying it's for the lower level under degree level job that I think is more appropriate for most active labour market policy. The degree level is slightly different labour group. But interesting that there is, the thing is that there's so much commitment. It's, I think we've got to be very careful with the energy ministries and the sustainable development ministries, because they have such, they want to be known that there's lots of jobs, so that justifies what they're doing and why they're important, etc. And I think it's very important for the more research-oriented community to actually say, well, look, it's not quite as good as what you say. We have to say this is what it appears to be, and therefore let us make policy based on reality, not on what the political policy happens to be. But thank you for your comments.
Yes, the last question, please.
Thanks, Ron. I'm just wondering, because you said the target of renewable energy, I mean, source was almost 100% by 2020, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Scotland has got nuclear power already?
Yes.
So they're going to be closing down there?
No, I think this is renewable, not counting nuclear, because we have nuclear power, but we will be an exporter of energy. So we've got our own usage, which will be the equivalent of renewable, and then we'll export other. So we're closing down our last coal-fired power station, which we're closing down.
Coal power one is.
Yeah, but we can do it because we're an exporter of energy, and because we're part of a national grid, UK grid, and also linked to some of Europe. So we can, the problem with renewable energy is that it's very uneven, and that's not such a problem really for us, because we're part of a grid which hopefully can take that into.
Yeah, but the next point is perhaps when you have got such a huge development in the area of wind power, right? And about the sustainability, kind of with more and more demand for power, are they going to keep going with demand?
Well, no, I think you're dead right. To me, one of the first things you should do is how do you reduce demand?
Yeah.
And there's a couple of ways you can reduce demand by doing fewer things, or you can reduce demand by energy efficiency. So I would say, one way of energy efficiency, particularly for housing, but given that only a small percentage of houses are built each year, we have to really retrofit, go back and insulate houses, make more more efficient heating systems, etc., and energy light bulbs, central heating, etc. So I think this is a huge area, and these are a lot of the jobs that this will be quite work intensive, because they are carpenter jobs. They're fairly basic, skilled craftsmen, some of them, but there's a lot that needs to be done to reduce energy usage while still keeping the same amount of comfort and heat in a house or in a building.
Thank you very much.